In just a moment, Generations with Kevin Swanson. But first, this. The Worldview in 5 minutes.
It's Monday, May 6th, A.D. 2019. This is The Worldview in 5 minutes, written by yours truly and heard at theworldview.com. I'm Adam McManus. As North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un looked on, the communist country fired several new missiles Saturday towards the East Sea at around 9 a.m. as simmering tensions with the West have once again started heating up, reports The Sun. On the 68th National Day of Prayer observance, President Donald Trump revealed some major policy announcements.
Every citizen has the absolute right to live according to the teachings of their faith and the convictions of their heart. This is the bedrock of American life. To protect this heritage, my administration has strongly defended religious liberty, 2 words you haven't heard too much about for a long period of time, but now you're hearing it all the time. Earlier this week, I took action to ensure that federal employees can take paid time off to observe religious holy days. And just today, we finalized new protections of conscience rights for physicians, pharmacists, nurses, teachers, students, and faith-based charities. Together, we are building a culture that cherishes the dignity and worth of human life. Every child, born and unborn, is a sacred gift from God. In addition, I am committing to you today that my administration will preserve the central role of faith-based adoption and foster care agencies to care for vulnerable children while following their deeply held beliefs.
In his latest column, Christian radio talk show host Dr. Michael Brown asked, quote, "Did you see the front cover of Time? It features a picture of Mayor Pete Buttigieg and his so-called husband with the caption, First Family. Why this exaltation of a fairly obscure, outlying political figure?" Brown notes that the reason Pete Buttigieg, a mayor in Indiana, has become the darling of the left is because he is a homosexual, quote-unquote, married to his partner, and he is a professing Christian, and he is challenging sacred biblical and church traditions. What more could the left ask for? Brown wrote, quote, "Mayor Pete and his partner are the perfect poster boys for the gay activist agenda, a culmination of years of messaging and marketing. They are like your ideal neighbors, just a little different." That's the message that Time is sending to its readers. It's time to redefine family. It's time for America as a whole to embrace gay marriage. The old era is past, end quote. Conservative Christian televangelist Pat Robertson rejected the belief that the universe is only 6,000 years old, calling it, quote-unquote, nonsense, reports the Christian Post. Last Tuesday, the host of CBN's The 700 Club said this.
This universe that we live in is 14 billion years old, and there's no question about it, and we have tremendous geological records and all the rest of it. And that 6,000-year stuff just doesn't compute.
Robertson, 89, was responding to a viewer who was confused by what she learned in church, quote, that the time of creation was 6,000 years ago, end quote, versus what science says, that, quote, dinosaurs are millions of years old, end quote. He noted that the school he founded, Regent University, teaches the old Earth view.
And there's a course that they were trying to hustle around called creation science. It was just nonsense, and it was so embarrassing. So let's give God credit for what he did, not try to limit him to 6,000 years.
Robertson echoed his recent anti-young Earth rant in 2012.
We have skeletons of dinosaurs that go back about 65 million years. To say that it all came about in 6,000 years is just nonsense. So there was a Big Bang. So nobody knows what caused the Big Bang, but I say God did it. I don't believe in so-called evolution as is currently presented as non-theistic. I believe that God started it all, and he's in charge of all of it.
2 Timothy 4, 2-4 declares, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth, and will turn aside to myths." To be clear, young Earth creationists arrive at 6,000 years, for both the Earth and the universe, by adding 5 days of creation, since Adam was said to have been created on the 6th day in the Bible, around 2,000 years between Adam and Abraham, and around 4,000 years between Abraham and the present. Scholars say Abraham lived about 2000 BC. A film entitled Is Genesis History was released in 2017 to support the young earth view and debunk the notion that those who hold such a position are, quote, unscientific or stupid, end quote. In an AnswersInGenesis.org article, Dr. Elizabeth Mitchell explains that, quote, Robertson is blending a secular, humanistic, God-denying worldview with his inaccurate understanding of the biblical worldview to hatch a position that fits neither, end quote. In her husband, Dr. Tommy Mitchell's detailed analysis of Robertson's remarks, quote, the millions of years view by demanding death before sin challenges the gospel message itself, end quote. And finally, during a debate in the Alabama House of Representatives over a proposed abortion ban, Democratic Alabama Representative John Rogers made an astonishing remark about why he opposed the bill, reports LifeNews.com. Listen.
Some kids are unwanted, so you kill them now, kill them later. You bring them in the world unwanted, unloved, then you send them to the electric chair. So you kill them now, kill them later.
In response, Donald Trump Jr. tweeted, quote, this is stomach-curling, and makes Virginia Governor Ralph Northam look like a moderate on abortion. Every Democrat running for president needs to be asked where they stand on this. The extreme turn we've seen from Democrats on abortion recently is truly sickening, end quote. Unbelievably, Representative Rogers doubled down. Listen to this.
I wonder if they should have aborted him when he was born, but he would have made that stupid statement, right? They could have aborted him, but they made Caesar to keep it, because he's evidently retarded or crazy. Donald Trump started, I know he's something wrong with that boy. I look at him and tell something wrong with it.
Proverbs 18 verse 2 says, a fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart. Join our annual Generations Father-Son Retreat in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, Thursday, August 29th through Sunday, September 1st. You can register now and save $150 at coloradofatherson.com. And that's the Worldview in 5 minutes. On this Monday, May 6th, in the year of our Lord 2019. Subscribe by iTunes or email to our unique Christian newscast at theworldview.com or get the app through Google Play or the App Store. I'm Adam McManus. Seize the day for Jesus Christ.
Welcome, my friends, to the Generations broadcast. Kevin Swanson, your host with you, homeschool father of 5, raising our kids out here in the Eastern Plains of Colorado. Bill Jack from Worldview Academy, also in studio with me. And today we're coming back to popular culture because, as I like to say, the heretical, hypothetical, if you had a choice between sending your kids off to a public school to be taught by Charles Darwin and Friedrich Nietzsche for 6 hours a day for 6 years versus having access to popular culture with Lady Gaga and Steven Spielberg for 6 hours a day, 6 years at a time, which would you choose? If you could choose one or the other, which would you go for? And of course, I would send my kids off to the public schools with Chuck Darwin and Fred Nietzsche, only because nobody can follow them and they'd probably fall asleep in the classroom.
Yeah.
You see the difference there, Bill?
I do.
Let's face it, friends. We package Jean-Paul Sartre and Friedrich Nietzsche in a very, very attractive packaging when we apply pop culture to these particular worldviews and sell them to our kids. And that's why I wrote the book, The Tattooed Jesus, What the Real Jesus Would Do with Pop Culture. Indeed, the popular culture, the popular media has exploded onto the scene just the last 50 to 60 years, becoming the most significant part of the zeitgeist, the most significant area of influence on the part of the principalities and powers that govern so much of our institutions today. And so we analyze popular culture. We don't just take a look at worldviews as they apply to the public schools and the public universities. We are really interested in how these worldviews apply themselves in the area of popular culture, and that's why we come back to this from time to time. You know, the most popular film of all time by box office receipts adjusted for inflation is...
It escapes me. It's out of my head. It's gone. It just kind of blew out of my head.
Blew out of your head.
Yeah, there was a breeze. Gone with the wind.
You got it. By far more than the others. Head and shoulders above Avatar. Avatar, of course, the modern number one box office favorite, but Gone with the Wind, number one. Actually, Avatar is 15th on the box office historical record if you adjust for inflation. So that's the difference, friends. It was a groundbreaking film that introduced cursing into the American vocabulary in, what can I say, 1954?
No. It was earlier.
It was earlier than that.
It had to be earlier than that.
Must have been, actually, it might have been 30s, yeah.
30s, because it's 70 years old.
Okay.
We are closer, that Gone with the Wind was closer to the Civil War in time than we are to Gone with the Wind.
Isn't that something? Well, it was a groundbreaking film, and of course, film has been used to introduce the popular culture to a post-Christian age. In other words, if you're going to mass produce and mass sell a particular anti-Christian, post-Christian worldview, if you're going to bring cursing into the modern world in the 1930s, you're probably going to have to do it with a major motion picture influenced by powerful, powerful forces. And that's what you get with the number one best-selling popular film of all time, Gone with the Wind. Now, the second wave of films, though, in the modern world has occurred in just the last 10 to 15 years. And we've referred to this already. The number one most popular film, not adjusted by inflation, in worldwide box office receipts was Avatar. And friends, the second wave of films that are making the most ground in shift in the zeitgeist today, of course, they've been taking God's name in vain and using curse words for 75 years now. So that's old hat. The whole post-Christian, just abuse God and abuse his name worldview has been active in Hollywood for 70 years. But now the zeitgeist is moving towards stepping over the line of despair and giving up on the possibility of reality. Indeed, postmodern relativism gives up on the possibility of any absolute truth and ethic, of course, but it also gives up on the possibility of an absolute reality.
Right.
That is, the average person wants to walk off the highway of reality through the 1,000 exit ramps, and the best exit ramp today is the sci-fi fantasy genre. In 1988, 0 out of the top 13 films by box office receipts were sci-fi fantasy. In 2008, 3 out of the top 13 films were sci-fi fantasy. In 2018, just last year, 9 out of the top 13 top box office receipts were sci-fi fantasy. And in 2019, this year, all 4 out of the top 4 films for this year are sci-fi fantasy. That is, we've moved from 0% sci-fi fantasy in 1988 to 23% in 2008 to 70% last year to 100% this year as the top 4 out of 4 most popular films by box office receipts. It's pretty much all fantasy now. All Marvel now. It's all Marvel now. Sci-fi literature has been known as the crack cocaine for readers. I was wondering where that came from. That's Arthur C. Clarke. Did you know that?
Arthur C. Clarke was a huge proponent of evolution and also a very successful sci-fi writer.
And he understood something. Yeah. He realized that if you can't find proof that there is no God and we are just random chance events in a causeless universe, if you can't find the proof in the fossil layers, maybe we can just pretend. Maybe we can just pretend by creating fantasy and sci-fi genres that work their way into film. And then before you know it, people have bought into the idea that we live in a fantasy world.
Do you know what Arthur C. Clarke wrote? 2001: Space Odyssey.
I didn't know that.
Yes. Yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke, known for naming sci-fi literature as the crack cocaine for readers, and the crack cocaine addictions are everywhere now as people have abandoned the highway of reality. They're not interested in dramas. They're not interested in comedies. All they're interested in is pure 180 proof sci-fi fantasy genres.
And all of those hinge on the idea, the underlying idea of evolution, that we can evolve to become superhumans. that there are different races of humans and there are gods, okay, and you can become one, okay? So that's an evolutionary construct. Now, are we saying that you shouldn't pay any attention to sci-fi, that it's evil, that you can't enjoy a good movie that might be a fantasy? And the answer is no, because we are imaginative creatures. We have imagination. We are creative beings because we're created that way. So we're not saying that you can't enjoy that. What we're saying is you need to guard your heart and your mind when you see something like this and analyze it from a worldview perspective. I can appreciate the creativity of something, but I don't have to buy into the worldview of it.
That is, watch The Addictions. Definitely watch The Addictions when it comes to the sci-fi fantasy genre. And your kids often fall into this so easily.
Right.
But also realize, as Bill said, the worldviews behind the Marvel comics, which, by the way, were not written by people who believed that God created this world 6,000 years ago. Be back with more in just a moment on the Generations Broadcast.
It's hard to imagine Christian pastors going to jail for their faith, and it's just as hard to imagine Christian businessmen fined $135,000 for not baking a cake in celebration of a homosexual wedding. It's hard to imagine America turning into a communist state that persecutes Christians and rewards the most aberrant. Will Christians just let it happen? Should Christians just let it happen? These are important questions, my friends. This is Kevin Swanson, and I wrote the book on freedom because I wanted to build a case for freedom. A biblical case. A historical case. And let me tell you, the history of freedom is the most inspiring story you'll ever read. Have you heard the story of the Magna Carta, Bannockburn, Leiden, and William the Silent, the American Pilgrims, and the Battle for Kings Mountain? How will we fight for freedom in this generation and the next? Well, tell the story first. The story of freedom. Let's leave a legacy for freedom for our children and our grandchildren. Get a copy of the new book, Freedom, for each of your children and grandchildren at generations.org. That's generations.org.
We are back on the Generations Radio broadcast. Kevin Swanson here with you. And yes, the world's love affair with the fantasy film genre explodes exponentially. Just this last weekend, Avengers Endgame beat the opening weekend record by, get this, 39%, a $350 million, raking in the box office and ticket sales last weekend, $1.2 billion globally. That's a whopping 39% increase over the previous record, which was $250 million by another Avengers movie just last year, meaning the Avengers Endgame shattered the record for biggest opening weekend. Again, $350 million in ticket sales domestically, $1.2 billion globally. Fox News says that proves Marvel runs the universe. I'm going to say to that one. No, it turns out Marvel doesn't run the universe, but at least at this point, the zeitgeist is dominated by Marvel and the fantasy genre, the superhero genre. And yes, this is an escape into the escapism in America. That escape is now almost total for the nation. But I want to take a moment, Bill, and analyze the worldview of Avengers. I think it's important for us to understand the worldview. What is the worldview that is being received by a huge proportion of the entire world? Now, this affects people in the church. I know that even people in Africa, African Christians attending churches in places like Malawi or Uganda or Zambia, they will travel into Lusaka or other places in order to catch an Avengers movie. And friends, this worldview obviously has a huge impact upon the entire world. We're talking about people in some of the most far-off reaches of the world gaining access to this worldview. And so what is this worldview that is imposed upon the entire world? It is, of course, the post-Christian worldview. But it's easy to pick it off, friends. It's no problem at all. You just simply take a look at the movie quotes and the conversation going on with these superheroes or these gods, these ancient Greek gods like Thor that are revived in the modern world, these ancient pagan gods that are revived in the modern world. It's no big deal. I mean, you could just read the movie lyrics, the movie quotes, and you can identify the worldview. It is so easy to identify unless you're sitting in the theater and you're under the spell of it. So if you're under the spell of it and you are not thinking and you are not receiving and you are not reading the quotes, you're probably not going to discern them properly. But Thor did say, I'm 1,500 years old. I'm only alive because the fate wants me alive. Thanos is just the latest along the long line of, and he'll be the latest to fill my vengeance. Fate wills it so. Meaning this is the pagan Greek worldview of the fates. The Greek doctrine of the fates relieves man of moral responsibility. It's a deterministic worldview. As we all know, I mean, this is not difficult to understand. This is something that's been around since Greek philosophers. If men do what they're forced to do by the fates, if everything happens according to the fates, then man is not morally responsible for his actions. So this is one of the cheap philosophical means by which man tries to relieve himself of moral responsibility. By the way, evolution is supposed to help with this too. Right. Evolution is supposed to relieve man of his moral responsibility to a god by means of a naturalistic, purely naturalistic, anti-supernaturalistic worldview. But the same thing is happening here with these Greek gods. They blame it on the fates. Just blame it on determinism. Blame it on the fates. This is the way it works in the modern world. And of course, polytheism, that is the many gods that are fighting it out over control, over power. Polytheism assures there will be no ultimate good and no ultimate moral standard. And at some points, even those who watch the movies have a hard time determining whether Thanos is really the bad guy and Thor and the Avengers are really the good guys. It's really hard to determine, and it's supposed to be hard to determine because in a worldview in which the many gods are fighting it out for power, there is no power that has the right to determine the absoluteness of good or evil. So that's just the way it works in this universe.
Yeah, it is Greek mythology, and humans are merely the pawns. So you have this battle of the gods playing out, and it is just power. It's a power struggle, not right versus wrong. It is merely who's going to have the power.
That's right. That's what it boils down to every time, isn't it? The movie, this particular movie, Endgame, has voluntary human sacrifice in it. So, and also witch doctors. The ancient one is a witch doctor or a sorcerer. He's called a sorcerer. In fact, he's called the supreme sorcerer of the world. So the ancient one is the supreme sorcerer of the world and respected to be so by the good guys in the film. He is said to use dark magic, but for good ends, of course, always for good ends. Whatever good is in a universe full of gods fighting it out for power. He casts spells and accomplishes major acts of sorcery. Now, the powers, it turns out, now this is critical in witchcraft. Witchcraft ultimately is that in which there is a battle for power where the power is perceived to be derived from the spirit world, from the demonic world, or from within the created sphere, where there is no ultimate sovereign God who is the source of all power. So the pagan religion of sorcery and witchcraft always obtains its powers from within the universe, and that is what makes this form, this worldview that is propounded by the Marvel Universe as pure witchcraft. Yes, this is all about witchcraft.
It's about the occult, and that is secret knowledge.
Right.
If I can just tap into the secret knowledge, then I will have power, and I will be able to control events, activities, the universe around me.
At least until the other gods obtain that power from you. So the power is a derivative from within the universe. The gods fight over the Infinity Stones. And by the way, the Infinity Stones have a little bit of a post-Christian edge to them. So there is a bit of a blending of post-Christianity to ancient paganism. There is no Christianity here, except the heroes take a moment to take God's name in vain, to lift a fist in the face of God, and just to prove that they are post-Christian, the apostate Christian. So there is that, which is, we've been doing that since Gone with the Wind. So, the soul gem, that is the Infinity Stone called the soul gem, grants the user control over all life in the universe. That is, for the time being, as long as you have control over the soul gem, you now have control over the life in the universe. You have been granted temporary sovereignty, which is kind of a hysterical concept that you could be temporarily sovereign until the other god wrests the stone from you. So the power of God is supposed to be gained by the soul gem, except there is no sovereign God because the powers are contained within the universe, not over the universe. So, friends, again, witchcraft. That's exactly what witchcraft proposes. And the time gem grants the user omniscience and total control over the past, present, and future. And again, doesn't that sound like just for the time being stealing the powers of a sovereign God that is the true and living God for just a time? Of course, this is deceit, friends. This is a worldview that could only come from the pit of hell, from the ideas of generated in the mind of Satan himself. So the time gem grants the user omniscience. The soul gem gives the user control over all life in the universe. The space gem grants the user omnipresent. Again, these are all the attributes, the incommunicable attributes of God. So, here you have post-Christians who understand something about the incommunicable attributes of God. They steal them from God, pretend to use them, at least for a time, and fight over them within a universe filled with gods, many gods, and that is the polytheistic universe of the Greek gods.
And that's one of the things that makes these movies appealing, is that we're all looking for a hero, and each one of these heroes, each one of these superheroes, reflects one of the characteristics of God, one of those admirable characteristics. Courage is one of those characteristics, for example. Humility, or the ability to sacrifice yourself for others. But we're drawn to that, and we recognize qualities and characteristics that are heroic, and they only are fulfilled completely in the person of Jesus Christ. He takes all of those characteristics without any human flaws and models those for us. But when we create heroes, like in the Marvel universe, we always create heroes that reflect biblical principles.
Well, in the human nature of Christ, he shares our human qualities. In the divine nature of Christ, he has these divine qualities, the incommunicable attributes of which we cannot participate in. So there are communicable attributes that we can receive, that is knowledge, righteousness, and holiness with dominion over the creature. So there are communicable attributes, but these incommunicable attributes, we don't dare think that we would ever obtain them. But of course, the Lord Jesus Christ does as the second member of the Trinity. So, friends, this is polytheism. These are where different gods or powers are fighting over control over the stones. And you notice in all of the sequences, Bill, it tends to go one direction to Thanos, and it moves over to Thor and his friends, and then back to Thanos, back over to Thor and his friends. So this is the very definition of pagan demonic witchcraft. This is as demonic as the witchcrafts and the witch doctors of Africa and other fear-enslaved, demonic enslaved peoples who are constantly witnessing the gods battling it out over the power over the universe. The only difference with the pagan world is that these are post-Christian apostates who are taking the incommunicable attributes of God and giving them to the creature. There are a few instances where God's name is taken in vain throughout these movies, including Endgame, just to be sure that everybody knows how much the heroes hate the true and living God. So, friends, this is what is going. Remember, there is a creature-creator distinction that is absolutely critical when it comes to the true and living, the one and only true and living God. Isaiah 44 reminds us, "Thus saith the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first, I am the last. Besides me, there is no God." And remember, in the ancient world, Bill, there were always the local gods fighting it out with the other gods, and the nations would fight it out with each other as represented by their own gods, hoping that somehow their gods could overcome the other gods, and they would be able to overcome the gods of the nations and maintain some ascendancy in terms of power. So that kind of thing has been around for a very long time among the pagan nations, but the true and living God, Jehovah, the Lord, the King of Israel, he says, "I am the first and I am the last." He is eternal. And besides him, there is no God. So, friends, these idol makers, these Hollywood producers, they cut down the cedars. They choose a cypress tree or an oak. and let it grow strong among the trees of the forest. They plant a cedar, and the rain nourishes it. Then it becomes fuel for a man. He takes a part of it and warms himself. He kindles a fire and bakes bread. Also, he makes a god and worships it. He makes it an idol, falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. Over the other half, he eats his meat. He roasts it, is satisfied. Also, he warms himself, says, aha, I am warm. I have seen the fire. And the rest of it he makes into a god, his idol, and falls down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, deliver me, for you are my God. So silly. The gods of the heathen are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. I mean, come on. Come on. And the Lord made all these angels, including the demonic angels, the evil ones of which will be cast into the flames of hellfire forever. So, friends, maintain the right worldview. Don't give way to this idea there is no sovereign God who retains the omniscience, the omnipotence, the sovereignty over all things. And be ever so careful about the sorcerers. Be ever so careful about the sorcerers. The Bible is against sorcery. The Bible is against rapists, murderers, and sorcerers. There's no such thing as a good rapist, a good sorcerer, and a good murderer. There's no such thing as that. You try to tell me that there's a good sorcerer and a good rapist. No, I don't buy that. I don't receive that. Micah 5:12, the Lord says, I will cut off sorceries from your hand, and you will have fortune tellers no more. Galatians 5:20, the works of the flesh are these: idolatry, sorcery, enmities. Also Deuteronomy 18:14, for those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so. Leviticus 19:31, do not turn to mediums or spiritists. Do not seek them out to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Revelation 21, verse 8, but for the cowardly and the unbelieving, the abominable and the murderers and the immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. If sorcerers go to hell, friends, you don't really want to be embracing sorcery, even if it's found in a movie. It should at least cause you to pause for a moment and say, no, that's not for us. And you know, Bill, these heathen gods are not satisfying. I don't think the movies are satisfying. Personally, I think they're boring. Because it's the same story over and over and over again. They battle it out in a purposeless universe where there's no possibility of ultimate good or evil. So you really can't be on one side or the other. And every sequel is one more boring battle over the universe, and it really doesn't matter.
And what happens is that the same story plays out. They just change the characters, and it does leave you dissatisfied. So that's why the series continues, because they're constantly replaying the same scenario. You know what it's like? It's like popcorn. Everybody can eat a whole bag of popcorn without thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
It's not that nutritious, really. It is not that satisfying. It's hard to eat a steak, okay? But popcorn, you can eat a whole bag and not think about it. And that's the way movies are. They're like popcorn. They can satisfy you for a little bit, but it's not nutritionally stable.
And friends, as you think about the metaphor, and so much of story is metaphor, that is, it's metaphoric. It's an example. It's an illustration of real life. But when you're